Hello, Cleveland Cavalier fans. My name is Bob Schmidt, and I am the host of the Fear the Fro podcast, a podcast entirely dedicated to the Cleveland Cavaliers and NBA basketball. You should subscribe. But the purpose for today's video is to talk to you about a bit of news and have a conversation with a man directly involved in said news. That news is that Nae'Qwan Tomlin of the Cleveland Charge has signed a 10-day contract to occupy the 14th roster spot on the Cavaliers. Now, this was not totally unexpected. The Cavaliers, in doing that trade to acquire DeAndre Hunter, brought their standard contracts down to 13. The NBA minimum is 14. So one of two things had to happen within the next few days, which was they had to sign a player prior to Thursday to a 10-day contract, which is what they just did with Tomlin, or they had to sign a buyout guy or an NBA vet to a guaranteed deal for the rest of the season. Now, this allows them to get a little more wiggle room below the luxury tax. It also essentially extends the clock on making a decision. There is some logic behind this that extends beyond who occupies the 14th roster spot. And I will just explain that briefly before I get to Jerry Burns, the first coach of Nae'Qwan Tomlin in an organized basketball setting. Now, with Tomlin, does this mean that he's for sure the 14th player for the Cavaliers this season? No. In all likelihood, it won't mean that. But what it does mean is that during the period of time where he's occupying this 10-day contract, that gives the Cavs time to evaluate what their options are for the 14th roster spot and decide upon what they're going to do with it. Now, that may mean converting a Travers, a JT Thor, and Amani Bates, and then having Tomlin slide right into the unoccupied two-way. I think there's a distinct chance that something like that happens. The second thing that could happen is the Cavaliers eventually come to an agreement with a vet who's not under contract, similar to what the Sixers did with Lonnie Walker, and that guy occupies the guaranteed 14th roster spot. Tomlin returns to the Charge, and then next year he finds himself on a two-way. Oh, and the third option, which is doomsday scenario, let's hope this does not happen, is that the clock runs out on this 10-day contract. They don't re-sign him to another 10-day contract, and then eventually he occupies the two-way spot of a different NBA roster. Now, that is the worst-case scenario. I want him to stay in the development system of the Cleveland Cavaliers because this is a guy who's averaging 16 points, 7 boards with the Charge. He shows some acumen facing the basket, a decent outside shot. He's tall, 6'10". He profiles to be the type of prospect that we would want. But the reason for today's conversation is because outside of from just a basketball standpoint, this is a man who has an incredible story from a human interest standpoint. He played 0 organized basketball in high school. This was a guy who grew up in New York City, in Harlem, and he was discovered really playing pickup basketball. From there, his journey began at a school called Monroe Community College. Now, I'm very familiar with this college because it's right next to where I grew up. It's in Rochester. And the man who's the head coach of that program, Jerry Burns, has been there for 33 years at this point. He's amassed 750 wins. He is a staple of the Western New York coaching and sports community. And so I thought, who better to talk to about Nae'Qwan Tomlin than a man who was there when his journey began? So what follows is a conversation between me and Jerry Burns. And Jerry was very accommodating to do this on incredibly short notice. So hopefully you take away something from it, even if that something is that this is a guy who we should all be rooting for. So without further ado, I give you that conversation. So joining me on the Fear the Fro podcast today is a man very familiar with Nae'Qwan Tomlin. It is his first coach, at least on a collegiate level. Joining the Fear the Fro podcast is Jerry Burns, longtime coach for Monroe Community College. Jerry, thank you for taking the time today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
So I don't know if you caught the news. I assume you did that Nae'Qwan Tomlin signed a 10-day contract with our Cleveland Cavaliers. And he's a guy who's been with the Charge for a bit, but in this trade that the Cavs did at the trade deadline, it opened up a roster spot that had to be filled. And Nae'Qwan got the first chance to kind of fill that void, whether it be kind of a, in the NBA, they have this, you have to have 14 guaranteed contracts on the roster. So they were under a crunch of having to sign a 10-day contract to get up to the 14 roster minimum. But Nae'Qwan's story, when I was looking into it, it was so interesting from the standpoint of, for a guy to rise to the professional ranks who didn't play organized high school basketball, I was reading a profile piece in the New York Times about him, and it mentioned Monroe Community College as the place where his journey began. And I thought it would be interesting to hear from your perspective how that all came about.
Yeah, it actually, it's it's a great story. I'm, really happy for him the way it's turned out. But looking back on it, my assistant coach at the time called me and said, "Hey, coach, we've got a kid that that he saw working out," and I'm like, "All right, what's he like?" He said, "Well, he's got good skill, but he's never played high school basketball." So I'm like, "Oh man, one of these dudes that we're going to have to, with the big guys too, you've got to have a lot of patience, and you got to work extra hard with them, and then usually later on in their career, they come around. It's hard at this level sometimes to get a kid that can come in that's 6'8". It's a good kid and play right away. So I did have in my mind like a preconceived idea of what Nay was going to be like. And so when he came up, we brought him up on a visit, and I was really shocked at how his skill level was. He wasn't a back to the basket kind of player. He was more of a square up kind of guy, and he had really good skills. So when we started playing, I really liked everything that I saw. So he came to us in January, and so we had a whole semester, like that whole spring semester, to work with him. So he sat out, and all he did was practice and take care of his classes. So we got we had that whole semester to work on his skills. And then in the summertime, he stayed here in the summertime. And again, we worked more and more. And the more we worked, the more I knew he was going to be a very, very good basketball player. I could just see, where he would be down the road. And, when the semester started in the fall, he was one of the best players we had on the team. And it would just, worked out great for us.
So fill me in on how that kind of works, where you said he joined the program in January. Does that mean you already knew at that point that he was a part of the team the following fall, or he just enrolled in school and there's some sort of, pre-commitment in terms of how does it work on that level with, say, like scholarships or that type of situation?
Yeah. So, again, he wasn't he wasn't in school. I mean, he never played organized basketball. So when my assistant coach had the opportunity to see him down there, he wasn't doing anything. He was just, playing pickup and stuff. So, he was
Can
from.
I ask on that point, how does it even go? Because when you say your assistant coach saw him, normally in my mind, I think, oh, okay, they send a scout to a game between two high-profile high school teams, and they see these guys. How does it even go about seeing a guy like that in a venue where he's not playing organized basketball?
Yeah, that's how, like, Rick Pitino and Calipari go recruiting. This is JUCO basketball, so you never know where the hell you have to go and who you have to see. It's kind of, I've had 3 kids like this. It's just, my assistant coach went down to watch a workout, someone else, and then saw Nate, and that's where it, how we got involved with it. It wasn't like we were going down to see Nate specifically. They just they were having a workout up in was up in Harlem. I'm not really sure the exact spot in Harlem, but my assistant at the time, Devon Jackson, who's moved on, he was down there watching them work out. And again, he sees this kid, and he goes, I think this kid could be pretty good. And he shot me a text, and I said, well, if you think he's that good, let's get him up on a visit. Brings him up. We get him up on a visit. But that, like, I want to say that was in November. And so he's doing nothing. So when I talked to his mom, and Nate has another guy that helps him out named Steve, and I talked to both of them, and I said, why don't we just get him here in January? He can start taking his classes. We could have him lift, do everything as a regular player, and then that way we can move his game along. Because with Nay, it wasn't the not that it was a problem. It wasn't the basketball that I was concerned about. When you don't play in an organized program, there's a lot of things that he just didn't understand, and it wasn't. These things were never taught to him. About showing up on time, how hard you have to work, going to class, how you carry yourself around campus. And he didn't understand that stuff. So we had that semester was hopefully going to teach him those things.
Okay, so then you arrived to the fall. He'd been with the program, 6-8 months at that point, and he kind of hit the ground running, it looks like. I'm basing this entirely off box scores and the stuff that I can glean from the stories out there, but in 1 year with the program, 13 points, 9 boards, pretty good shooting splits, even a little bit of a 3-point prowess there on a couple of attempts a game.
Yep.
Did you have any expectation? I know you said that by the time that the season arrived, you knew he was going to be one of your better players. How much was the reality different from what your expectations were in that year that he spent with you?
Well, the basketball was, like I said, was never going. When you watched him, you knew he had all the skills to be an elite basketball player. That was never a problem. They lived in the gym. That was like if you ever needed to find him, you just went into the gym and there he was. The reality with Nay was just getting him to understand the other stuff. Like you have to go to class all the time. And he just really thought that he could just, I'm here to play basketball. And it wasn't done maliciously. He was a young kid and he would be spending most of his time in the gym. And I would say, hey, look, man, you gotta go to class. And that took longer for him to understand. And, like you got to show up on time. He hated the lift and that, and I'd always tell him, like, I haven't seen him now since, he was playing last year. I think it was for Memphis. And, but his body, he's still not like really big, but he's gotten stronger. And that was just something that, took a little bit longer for him to understand where he needed to be, physically and mentally. Forget the basketball, in those aspects to be really successful.
So can you talk me through when he made the change and he went to the community college in Kansas there, Chipola? How does that process play out? Did you have any idea during the season that he wouldn't be with the program longer than a year, or did you have conversations as to what insight do you have onto why that happened? Because that's something I couldn't glean from the stories that were out there.
Yeah, there was a couple of things. Chipola, I call it Chipola. Chipola is down in Florida.
Oh, Florida, right?
And we, with COVID hit, and our school, being in Western New York, had made the decision that they're going to shut everything down, and there was no access to the gym, there was no access to the weight room. So you were pretty much just going to sit over in the dorms, and you couldn't do anything. So Steve had called me, and we were talking about putting Nay into summer school. And Steve is a gentleman that helps Nay out, and he really thought it'd be best for Nay to go down to the Chipola and get the opportunity to play. And I thought he was right. I didn't, I told him I was a little disappointed, but in the same token, it was the best move for him. I mean, what the hell are you going to do? You're going to sit in the dorm for a year, or you can go down and play. He's a young kid. I think he was 18 at the time, and it worked out great for him.
Now, have you maintained any contact with him through his time, there and then K-State and then onto the pro level after Memphis?
Not. It's been a couple of years now. It's been about 2-3 years.
Okay.
Since I last talked to him. We talked a little bit when he was down at Chipola, and that was really the last time I talked to him. About that. His phone, I would assume, started blowing up, and when he was at Kansas State, And I had gotten a lot of calls. I know a couple of people in the NBA, and they had called me, in regards to what their thought process was about. Kind of like what you guys are doing, about him. And Nate was always a great kid. I'd never had any problems with Nate. The only problem, like, there were just, like young kid things. That's all.
Well, and I think that's part of the reason I brought it up. And, I was dancing around the subject because I don't want this to be negative in tone.
Yeah.
But with all the stuff that happened at Kansas State, and you allude to people reaching out to you on the NBA level, I think that's something you always hear around draft time. And when guys are in the program is, okay, they'll turn to people who have experiences with them in regards to character stuff. And that's kind of why I wondered if you stayed in contact, because with somebody so much a part of his very formative, beginning of organized basketball, to see the journey that he's gone through with what happened in Kansas State and then Memphis, and then now, just this success story with the Charge that's getting an opportunity on an NBA level. That's why I was curious, because, you did speak to the idea that it wasn't the basketball. The basketball wasn't the issue. It was getting him acclimated to, the expectations of, playing organized basketball and the stuff that came along with it. So that was my curiosity, and the whole line of questioning was just, it sounds like from what you're saying, character was never really a concern there at MCC.
No, he had a couple of issues, but that's,
Youth,
I have 5 kids, and we've had a couple issues, so, no, Nate was a great kid. I always enjoyed coaching Nate. I really did. And, if you talk to him, I would hope he would say that he enjoyed being here. Now, I yelled at that dude a ton of times. If he knows that, I didn't let him get away with anything. We have a rule, and he'll tell you this. If you miss you miss class, you got to run around campus. Well, he ran around this campus more times than, he was like a world-class sprinter at the end. But he never, he was never, we have knuckleheads and we got bad kids. I would always put him into the category of a knucklehead, and those kids I can deal with. He just, no one had ever taught him about, how you're supposed to carry yourself on campus, and, when you're in a hotel, how you're supposed to act, and getting on the bus. And, those were just all learning things that is, besides from, being a coach, you have to teach basketball, but you have to teach a lot of these young guys, how to act. And that was, those were issues with Nay. But I always loved, he had a great energy. He always brought, he was a funny dude, man, funny ass dude. Oh, God. He would drive, like some of the stuff that he would say was, but he always had a great sense of humor. And, I really don't know what happened out, like I've heard a lot of different things, but all I would say is if he's given a chance, which Cleveland is doing, you just lay it out for him. You say, look, these are the things, that's how I did it, and you show him some discipline and you show him some love, and he'll respond greatly to that, I would think.
Well, that's my hope, is that when this situation with the trade happened and the roster spot opened up, the Cavs had a couple of options. They could have brought up any of the 3 guys they currently have on 2 ways, but the way they seem to operate is a lot of times they did it with Pete Nance, where they'll give a 10-day contract to a guy who's on, the G League team. And it's sort of a bonus in the sense that it's found money for those guys. But then eventually, when they do come to whatever the decision is about the 14th roster spot, my expectation and my hope would be that if Tomlin doesn't get the standard deal altogether, that he'll get elevated onto one of the 2-way contracts and just take another step along that development journey. Now, I for the Fro listeners who don't realize, Jerry, you've been at the school for 30 plus years, 750 wins. I think it's an interesting perspective from somebody who's spent so much time coaching college basketball and seen the journeys of, hundreds of student athletes. How rare is this type of situation for you in the position that you're in, seeing guys come in relatively raw and have this kind of arc from a basketball journey. Do you have any other stories similar to this in your time?
Like I said, I've coached 3 kids like Nae being one of them, and I had 2 other guys. One 25 years ago named Brian Addison, and I went down to Queens again to see a workout, and I saw this 6'9" kid shooting on a basket on the side, and he lived in a home shelter, and I was watching him play, and I brought him up, and he ended up signing with University of Buffalo. Had a really good career, played Division I, so he was very successful. And then about 5 or 6 years, and this other kid played with Nate. He was also from Harlem, a kid named Majesty Brandon. And he was on ESPN. He was a kid, he'd shoot a free throw, he'd spin it on his finger, and it was like, the highlights. And I got a lot of calls about that one. They'd be like, Coach, are you teaching that? No.
Wait, do you mean when he was at the free throw line, he would spin the ball on his finger and then?
Yeah, did you ever see that on ESPN?
No, but now I'm going to Google it. I'm going to Google it immediately.
Google Majesty Brandon, and Madge played at Canisius, and it was, and he played. He was a Division I player. Didn't play high school basketball. I saw him at a workout. A friend of mine named Eddie Lau, who has these things in New York City. So I saw him down there, and Eddie said, "Hey, Coach, you got to see this kid." I watched Madge. Well, Madge walked in. He looked terrible. I'm like, oh my, this. So I'm not gonna. He's like 5'7", 5'8". I said, this kid's not. Then he started playing. I was like, oh no, wait a second, now hang on, we'll change your mind a little bit. But he when he got up here, he started playing, and I remember the first game he went to the free throw line, and the official throws it out to him, and he gets it, and he spins it on his finger, puts it around his back, but he shot 87, 88%. So, like, people, Coach, you're gonna let him get away with that? You're gonna? I said, I don't care how he could kick it in for all I care, as long as the damn ball goes in the basket. So, but Madge was the same way as Nae. Now, Madge was a year older than Nae, so Nae they played together 1 year. So I actually had 2 kids that never played high school basketball, and those 2 kids both went on to play Division I basketball, which was a great honor for both of them.
That's a pretty unbelievable story. So how much turnover do you get at your level in terms of people trying to climb up, to higher divisions or whatever the case may be?
Every year.
Every year. Yeah, how much of the percentage of your roster would you say turns on a year-to-year basis?
Usually, I would say 50% is around a normal. Now, 3 years ago, we had, we got rid of everyone because we were having problems. But that's just that's what JUCO is all about. People get, if you're at a 4-year school, you couldn't do that. At a JUCO, you can, you can clean house, as we call it, and start all over. And it's a fresh start. Sometimes it's even better. That you get some, new bodies and some fresh people in there. But yeah, I'd say about 50% every year.
Okay. Now, just from an outlook in terms of, you've been doing this a long time. Has the changes on the, Division I level, is there any trickle down to the JUCO level in terms of, NIL, things of that nature?
Not the NIL. That hasn't really hit us. The biggest thing is the portal is made it real difficult for a lot of our guys being recruited. Whereas I would see, last year we had a really good point guard who I, thought was a low D1 guy, and he didn't get one D1 offer, but he ended up going Division II and having a really good. He's playing really well right now. He's out in West Virginia, but the recruiting, has not been, they don't come and recruit the kids as much because, again, they can just grab somebody out of the portal. You can get a low D1 transfer to go play Division II. So that's where I think we've been hurt the most at JUCO.
How have you adapted to that? Is there anything you've had to try to do differently to kind of ward that stuff off, or to,
Well, I talk to the kids, and I tell them they have to be, you know, extra special. Um, you can't take a night off nowadays, whereas everything's being videotaped. They're watching everything. You got to be a special kind of player, where they would take a JUCO kid that's maybe borderline, is a good player, but is borderline character. They, guys are not doing that anymore. I see them, they'd rather take someone that's a transfer from a 4-year school than take a questionable kid from a JUCO. So I talk to them about that all the time. And then we've always talked about grades. If your grades are anywhere, um, you know, questionable, they're not even going to touch you. So you got to do well with your grades.
Well, Jerry, I really appreciate you taking the time. I mean, I just emailed you today. So for you to fit me in on such short notice to talk about Nae'Qwan's journey, I really appreciate that. And I'm hoping the best for you guys in the program. And I think it's a cool thing. I hope it works out just from the standpoint of it would be, a pretty awesome feather in your cap to have a guy who came through the program end up as an NBA mainstay.
Yeah, Nay is a quality kid, and I really hope it works out for him. I'll be watching him, and it's a great story. You love to see the kids be successful. That's why we're all still doing it.
Definitely. Well, Jerry, thank you for taking the time today. Thank you for joining the Fear the Fro podcast.
All right, you're welcome, Bob. Thank you.
Cavalier fans, thank you for checking out that interview with Jerry Burns, the head coach of the Monroe Community College Tribunes, the first organized basketball, really, that Nae'Qwan Tomlin played. Now, I hope your takeaway from that was not a fixation on the off-court stuff. I did want to ask Jerry, though, in the context of that interview, because he talked about how the biggest challenge for him was not the basketball part. Tomlin has always been an exceptionally talented basketball player. It was getting him accustomed to the responsibilities and the expectations that go along with organized basketball. So I personally, just for my own interest, was curious if he had had any communication with him following what happened at Kansas State. And you can Google that for more details if you're unfamiliar. But the short version of it is he got in an altercation at a bar. It led to him being suspended. And then, if you believe the sources, the head coach of the Wildcats wanted him reacclimated to the program, Jerome Tang, but the AD dismissed him. There were protests on campus in front of the arena about bringing Tomlin back because he was an integral part of that team that went on an Elite Eight run at Kansas State. So then he went to Memphis, succeeded there. The thing I will say about the whole thing is, regardless of whatever the mistakes he made were, sometimes that allows a player to be more focused and stay more on task, because he had to overcome a lot to get to where he's at. He had to overcome no real recruiting offers outside of this small community college in Western New York, then went through COVID, changed schools to Florida, went to Kansas State, had immense success there, fell out of favor after that incident, landed at Memphis. This is a long journey to arrive to where Nae'Qwan Tomlin is today. And I hope if you took anything from this interview, it's that we should all be rooting for this kid. I'm Bob Schmidt. Please, if you don't subscribe already, do it. You can leave a comment down below. And till the next time, this is the Fear the Fro podcast.